This is KZQX Emergency Broadcasting, call sign Whiskey 77. Jesus, my hands won't stop shaking. Can't tell if it's the coffee or what I just heard bleeding through the military channels. Timestamp. Hell, what time is it? 1,347 hours? No, wait, 1437. The clock's busted. Been stuck on the same damn minute since the first flash lit up the horizon 3 days ago. Y'all need to hear this. Every soul still breathing in Sector Delta needs to know what just came down the wire. Got my notepad here, same one I used to cover the county fair back when fairs mattered. Back when anything mattered that wasn't measured in rads or body counts. The ink's running low, but this can't wait for fresh supplies. Commander's voice came through clear as church bells on that secure channel. Course, nothing's secure anymore, not since the EMP fried half our gear. But his voice, cold as January creek water, said it plain. Retaliation protocol is authorized. Strike package confirmed. God help us all. Strike package. That's military speak for we're about to turn someone's world into glass and ash. But who? And why now when we got our own fires to put out? See, here's what don't add up, folks. 3 days ago, we took that first hit. Some kind of tactical strike that lit up the eastern compounds like the 4th of July. Word was it came from the Crimson Resistance, those red banner radicals who've been stirring up trouble since the partition wars ended. But now the commander's talking retaliation like we know for certain who pulled that trigger. My granddad used to run moonshine through these hills, said you never trust a man who's too quick to point fingers after trouble starts. Smart old coot. Wish he was here to make sense of this mess, 'cause something's rotting in the state of, well, whatever's left of our state. The air tastes like pennies and burnt plastic out here in the quarantine zone. Been that way since the blast, like licking a battery that's been sitting in a fire. Crowds of folks pressed up against the wire, hollering at the guards, begging for answers nobody's got. Or maybe answers somebody's got, but ain't sharing. You hear that? That's my old civil defense counter, thing my daddy gave me when I first got into radio work. Steady tick tick tick, like a clock counting down to something we can't see coming. Used to be quiet as a graveyard on Sunday. Now it's chattering like a magpie, and that's got me more spooked than the commander's retaliation talk. But here's the thing that's eating at me, and I'm gonna tell y'all straight, 'cause that's what you deserve, that signal carrying the commander's voice. It was jumping frequencies, bouncing around like a drunk in a phone booth. Professional broadcasters, we call that frequency modulation drift, usually means your transmitter's shot to hell or someone's been messing with the signal path. I've been working these airwaves for 17 years, folks. Started when I was barely old enough to shave, learning the trade from old Pete who ran the station before the corporates bought him out. Pete taught me to listen for the spaces between words, the little tells that separate truth from horse manure. The commander's voice had those tells. Micro-hesitations where there shouldn't be any. Stressed syllables in all the wrong places. Like he was reading from a script instead of giving orders from his gut. Hold on, something's happening out there. Sounds like the crowd's getting restless. Guards shouting something about authorized personnel only and maintain distance from the perimeter. But the folks out there, they're not just scared anymore. They're angry. Been cooped up in this zone for 3 days with nothing but government cheese and promises that help's coming. Help ain't coming, is it? Not the kind they're hoping for, anyway. Sweet Lord, that counter's picking up pace. Either we got more fallout drifting in from the east, or, hell, I don't know what, or means anymore. Everything I thought I knew about radiation, about protocol, about who's supposed to protect who, it's all gone sideways. The emergency manual says, stay tuned to official channels for updates. Keep calm, follow instructions, trust the system. But what happens when the system's the thing you can't trust? What happens when the official channels are broadcasting lies wrapped up in authority's voice? Damn equipment's acting up again. Been happening since yesterday, right around the time that convoy rolled through. Black vehicles, no markings, heading toward the eastern checkpoint. Funny how the radio interference started right after they passed. Funny peculiar, not funny haha. My cousin Ray worked. Communications at the base. Haven't heard from him since this whole mess started. Ray's good people, straight as an arrow, but he follows orders like gospel. If someone told him to route signals through compromised equipment, he'd do it without question. That's the kind of loyalty that gets you killed when loyalty's pointing in the wrong direction. Winds picking up, blowing from the east. Same direction as that first blast. Same direction as whatever the commander's planning to turn into a parking lot with his retaliation strike. Folks, I'm going to level with you about something. When I started this broadcast, I thought I was bringing you the news. Thought I was doing my job, keeping the community informed like a good broadcaster should. But the more I dig into this signal, the more I think I'm not reporting the story. I think I'm part of it. That counter's telling a story too, and it ain't a happy ending kind of story. Radiation levels climbing, which means either the wind's shifted and we're getting more fallout from the original strike, or there's something new cooking. Something that started right around the time Commander's retaliation order went out. Y'all remember the old duck and cover drills from school? Of course you do. We all laughed at them, thought they were leftovers from our parents' paranoia. But here's the thing about those drills, they were never about surviving the blast. They were about giving folks something to do so they wouldn't panic when the real thing happened. I'm making a note here in my log. Signal anomaly at 14:37. No hell, what time is it really? The sun's lower than it should be for what my watch says, but maybe that's the ash in the air filtering the light. Time doesn't mean much when you're measuring your life in Geiger clicks anyway. But that signal anomaly, that's something I can trace. Something I can follow back to its source. Might not like what I find, but finding the truth is what separates a real broadcaster from just another voice on the airwaves. Hang tight, folks. I'm going to keep digging, keep listening, keep asking the questions that need asking. If there's more broadcasts coming, I'll relay what I can. If the signal goes dark, if the signal goes dark, you'll know something happened to old Whiskey 77. But you'll also know that somewhere out there, the truth's still waiting to be found. This is KZQX Emergency Broadcasting, maintaining watch on frequency 146.940. Stay safe, stay sharp, and don't believe everything you hear, even if it's coming from someone in uniform. KZQX Emergency Broadcasting, Whiskey 77 back on the air. Christ, hope somebody's still listening out there. Been dark for 43 minutes. No, check that, 57 minutes since my last transmission. Hard to keep track when your backup generator's choking on fumes and your chronometer's been fried since that first EMP pulse. Something's gone sideways out here in Sector Delta. Gone sideways and picked up speed. That crowd I mentioned in my last broadcast, they ain't just pressing against the wire anymore. They're moving like a river of scared flesh, all streaming toward the eastern checkpoint. Every last soul, from grandmothers clutching photo albums to kids who should be in school if there were still schools to go to. And that civil defense counter my daddy gave me? Sweet Jesus, it's chattering like a telegraph key in the hands of a speed freak. Found something while I was off air, folks. Had to push through that crowd. And let me tell you, that was like swimming through molasses made of desperation and unwashed bodies. Took me 20 minutes to cover 100 yards, but I made it to Ray's communication shack near the perimeter fence. You remember Ray, my cousin who works base communications, the one I mentioned before. Ray's not there. Nobody's there. But his transmitter's still warm, and there's a half-eaten sandwich sitting next to his logbook. White bread and government-issue peanut butter, one bite taken out of it. Like he got up to check something and just never came back. Here's what I found scattered across Ray's workbench. Frequency allocation charts, signal routing protocols, and a maintenance log that cuts off dead at 0630 this morning. Last entry reads, Secure Channel Reroute per Command Directive 7739 Alpha. Authentication confirmed. Now, I've been working these frequencies since before most of y'all got your first driver's license, and command directives don't usually need 4-digit alpha designations, unless they're covering operations that get buried in file cabinets nobody admits exist. 7739 Alpha sounds like the kind of classification that comes with consequences for asking too many questions. But here's the detail that's got my skin crawling, and I'm scratching it into my notepad because my memory's been playing tricks ever since I started breathing this metallic air. Ray's log shows that secure channel reroute happened at 0630 hours. The commander's retaliation broadcast I picked up, that went out at 1437 hours. 6 hours and 7 minutes between the reroute and the broadcast. You don't prep secure communications channels 6 hours before you have secure intelligence to communicate. That's like chambering a round before you see the target. Hell, that's like building the gun before you decide what needs shooting. Y'all catching that sound? That ain't thunder rolling in from the western ridges. That's machinery, heavy machinery, grinding its way east toward whatever coordinates the commander's got painted in his targeting system. But the timing's wrong. Retaliation strikes don't spin up this fast unless the strike packages were already loaded, fueled, and sitting on their launch rails. Unless this whole thing was choreographed before that first blast ever turned our eastern compounds into glowing craters. That old counter's losing its mind now. I'm holding it steady as I can, but the needle's jerking around like it's having some kind of electronic seizure. Radiation doesn't spike randomly. Physics don't work that way. There's got to be a new source. Something that wasn't registering an hour ago. Something that's pumping out REMs fast enough to fry the counter's circuits. I'm pushing deeper into the zone now, following the human river toward whatever's drawing them east. Not because I want to. Every survival instinct I inherited from my granddad's moonshine running days is screaming at me to head for the hills. But because that's where the story is. That's where the truth is hiding under layers of official bullshit and classified directives. The folks shuffling along beside me, they ain't talking. Just moving forward like they're following some frequency only they can tune into. There's a woman about my age, gray streaks in her brown hair, and she's got a little girl clutched against her side. Kid can't be more than 7, 8 years old. The girl's lips are moving constant, but no sounds coming out. Just mouthing the same word over and over. Daddy. Problem is, Daddy ain't coming home. None of their people are coming home. Everything past the Eastern Ridge line got turned into what the emergency broadcasting bulletins call Zone Red, unsurvivable conditions. But nobody's told these folks that. Nobody's explained that their loved ones got vaporized in the first 30 seconds, turned into shadows on walls that ain't standing anymore. Instead, somebody's letting them walk toward the radiation source like cattle heading for the slaughter chute. Winds change direction again, coming from the northeast now instead of due east. That ain't natural weather behavior for this region. Our prevailing winds run east-southeast from the Tennessee Valley, have for as long as anybody's been keeping records. Storms don't just pivot 90 degrees unless there's something massive disrupting the pressure gradients. Something like superheated air rising from a blast zone. Or maybe something like the thermal signature of a target that's about to become a blast zone. Found Ray's backup portable unit buried under a stack of equipment requisitions. Thing looks like it got kicked around some, but it still locks onto the military frequencies. Most of the channels are running full encryption now. Been that way since yesterday morning, but there's signal bleed on the emergency bands. Fragments of conversation that make no sense individually, but when you start piecing them together, sound of radio tuning, static, brief encrypted voice fragments bleeding through. Target verification complete, grid coordinates confirmed. Civilian displacement proceeding per timeline projections. Radiation masking protocols effective, background readings within acceptable deception parameters. Radiation masking protocols. Now that's terminology you don't hear in standard military communications. That's scientific jargon. Research division terminology. The kind of language that gets used when somebody's running a controlled experiment and they need to hide the real data from the test subjects. Test subjects. Sweet suffering Christ, that's what we are. We're the goddamn test subjects. I'm hauling us back to my broadcast station now, folks. Something's wrong with this whole setup. Wrong in ways that make my skin crawl, and my granddad's moonshine running instincts scream warnings. The crowd behavior, the timeline inconsistencies, these radiation readings that don't match any fallout pattern I learned in civil defense training. None of it makes sense unless you flip the whole thing backwards. Unless you stop thinking about the retaliation strike as revenge for what happened to us, and start thinking about it as the second act in whatever the hell happened to us in the first place. Back in my broadcast shack now, sealed up tight as I can manage with duct tape and paranoia, but that civil defense counter ain't slowing down none. If anything, the clicking's getting more frantic. The needle's pushing hard into the red zone, the zone that means you should have been dead 10 minutes ago. But I'm still breathing, still thinking. Still pissed off enough to keep digging. I'm looking at Ray's frequency allocation charts again, trying to trace that signal path from this morning's 0630 reroute. Standard military protocol dictates that command communications broadcast on primary frequencies with automatic failover relay to secondary monitoring stations across the operational theater. But this reroute bypassed every secondary station in the network, sent the commander's retaliation order directly to a single destination. Emergency Broadcasting Station KZQX, frequency 146.940. My station, my frequency, my voice. They wanted me to hear it. They needed me to broadcast it. They required Whiskey 77 to be the voice that delivered news of the retaliation strike to Sector Delta, Because when this whole operation wraps up and the post-incident investigators start asking uncomfortable questions, they'll need a scapegoat. They'll need a local broadcaster who got confused by the emergency conditions, who misinterpreted classified communications, who spread panic by not following proper information dissemination protocols. They'll need a dead man who can't contradict the official story. I'm killing the main transmitter array now. Switching to portable power, short-range broadcast only. If you're close enough to pick up this signal, you need to understand that everything we've been told is running backwards. The first strike on our eastern compounds wasn't the beginning of this nightmare. It was the justification for completing an operation that started long before any of us knew we were part of it. And that retaliation strike Commander Hales got spinning up. That ain't revenge, folks. That's cleanup. Counter just died. Not because the radiation levels dropped, because they exceeded the instrument's maximum measurement capacity. When a civil defense radiation detector goes silent in the middle of a contaminated zone, that means you're breathing air that contains enough REMs to cook you from the inside out. But I'm still here, still thinking clearly enough to parse signal intelligence and question command directives. Still breathing metallic air that tastes like battery acid and electrical fires, but still breathing. Which means either this old counter finally gave up the ghost after 17 years of faithful service, or we ain't dealing with standard nuclear fallout. We're dealing with something that's been engineered to look like normal post-blast contamination, while being something entirely different. Something that measures differently. Something that kills differently. Something that leaves some people alive for reasons that ain't got nothing to do with luck. I'm packing up everything that ain't nailed down, folks. Going mobile before whoever's orchestrating this three-ring nightmare can triangulate my broadcast position. Can't stay in one place long enough for them to send a cleanup crew, but I'll keep transmitting as long as I got battery power and something worth saying. Next broadcast's coming from somewhere closer to ground zero. Somewhere closer to whatever's really happening in those eastern compounds that got turned into unsurvivable terrain. Might not survive what I find out there, but ignorance has killed more people in this world than knowledge ever did. This is KZQX Emergency Broadcasting, call sign Whiskey 77, going dark for relocation but not going silent. Keep your receivers locked on 146.940, and remember, when the official story makes less sense than a soup sandwich, the real story's usually hiding in the details they don't want you to notice. And folks, if you don't hear from me again, it won't be because I stopped digging for answers. It'll be because I found them. Story doesn't make sense. That usually means the real story's hiding right underneath it. And folks, if you don't hear from me again, it won't be because I stopped looking for answers. It'll be because I found them. KZQX Emergency Broadcasting. Jesus Christ. Whiskey 77 transmitting from. Hell, I don't even know where I am anymore. Grid coordinates are meaningless when the landscape keeps changing faster than you can read the compass. Been moving for 3 hours now, following that human river toward whatever's drawing them east. That civil defense counter I told you all about? The one that died from radiation overload? Well, it ain't dead. Found that out when I cracked it open to salvage the battery pack. Somebody rewired the circuits. Professional job, clean solder points, military-grade components. This ain't field modification, folks. This is factory customization. My daddy's old counter was designed to lie to me. Programmed to spike false readings right on schedule, to make me think I was breathing death when I was breathing something else entirely. I'm looking at the modification schematic right now. Yeah, they left the goddamn blueprint taped inside the battery compartment. Arrogant bastards figured I'd be too dead or too scared to open her up. But Granddad's moonshine running blood don't scare easy, and I got steady hands even when the world's falling apart. The counter was broadcasting my location every time it clicked. Each spike was a GPS coordinate, transmitted on a frequency so tight it takes military-grade equipment to receive it. I've been walking around wearing an electronic leash for the past 6 hours, telling whoever's running this operation exactly where to find me. That crowd I've been following, they ain't refugees fleeing towards safety. They're test subjects being herded toward a collection point. Every single person shuffling through this wasteland got issued modified emergency equipment during the evacuation assistance phase. Geiger counters, emergency radios, medical alert devices, all rewired to track and report, handed out by helpful civil defense volunteers who disappeared once the tracking grid was established. That machinery sound I've been hearing? It ain't heading east anymore. It's heading toward me. 3 vehicles, maybe 4, judging by the engine harmonics. Heavy transport, the kind of rolling stock they use for containment operations when the contamination is too hot for standard hazmat protocols. But I ain't contaminated. None of us are. That metallic taste in the air ain't radiation poisoning. It's aerosolized tracking compounds. Microscopic transmitters designed to settle in your lungs and broadcast biometric data. Heart rate, stress indicators, location tracking, maybe even brainwave patterns if the rumors about those DARPA experiments are true. Subject Whiskey 77 approaching collection grid 7739 alpha. Biometric readings within acceptable parameters. Psychological profile indicates maximum resistance threshold reached. Initiate direct confrontation protocol. Well, I'll be damned. They ain't even trying to hide it anymore. Vehicles are stopping about 50 yards out. For Humvees with non-standard markings, no unit identifiers, no base designations, just serial numbers that probably trace back to research facilities instead of military bases. The kind of transport they use for containment operations when the contamination requires specialized handling protocols. Here they come, folks. 5 personnel in full NBC gear, nuclear, biological, chemical protection suits. But their suits ain't radiation rated. I can tell from the material reflection and the breathing apparatus configuration. These are biocontainment suits. The kind you wear when you're dealing with experimental pathogens, not fallout. Attention, civilian broadcaster. You are in violation of Emergency Broadcasting Protocol 7739 Alpha. Terminate your transmission immediately and submit to decontamination procedures. Y'all hear that? Decontamination procedures for contamination that don't exist, issued under an emergency protocol that got implemented 6 hours before the emergency happened. But I got questions for these boys before they stuff me in the back of their rolling laboratory. Which one of y'all is running point on this operation? And don't give me no runaround about classified information. I already cracked your frequency allocations and your tracking protocols. Sir, you need to understand that you have been exposed to dangerous levels of experimental bioaerosol compounds. Your cognitive functions may be compromised. Please comply with extraction procedures for your own safety. Experimental bioaerosol compounds. There it is, folks. Not radiation. Not nuclear fallout. Experimental compounds that got dispersed through the air to make us think we were dealing with a nuclear incident while they tested whatever the hell they really wanted to test. I'm cranking this portable transmitter to maximum broadcast power. If they're gonna shut me down, I want every receiver in a 100-mile radius to hear what comes next. You want to talk about compromised cognitive functions? Let me tell you what I figured out. That first blast on our eastern compounds wasn't no enemy strike. It was a controlled detonation designed to provide cover for dispersing your experimental compounds across Sector Delta. Sir, step away from the broadcasting equipment. You are interfering with a classified research operation. Classified research operation. Y'all hear that? Not a military response. Not a retaliation strike. A research operation that required turning American civilians into unwilling test subjects for biological weapons development. Commander Hale ain't running revenge strikes. He's running the second phase of your biological weapons test. That retaliation broadcast was designed to justify dispersing a second round of compounds, wasn't it? The broadcast was designed to provide psychological stress conditions necessary for complete data collection. Phase 1 dispersal required baseline biometric readings. Phase 2 requires crisis response data under controlled panic conditions. Sweet Jesus, they just admitted it. The retaliation strike ain't about destroying enemy targets. It's about measuring how we respond to believing we're all gonna die. They're using nuclear terror as a psychological catalyst to test biological weapons effects under maximum stress conditions. They're smashing my equipment now, folks. 5 seconds ago, this was a classified operation they'd kill to keep secret. Now they're bragging about it like it's some kind of scientific breakthrough. That tells me one thing. They ain't planning on leaving any witnesses who can contradict the official story. Phase 2 detonation occurs at 1,647 hours, 37 minutes from now. All test subjects will be terminated through controlled exposure to weaponized compounds dispersed by atmospheric detonation over grid coordinates 7,739 alpha. That's where that crowd's been heading. Y'all been walking toward ground zero for a biological weapons test that's designed to kill every person breathing in Sector Delta. I'm making a break for it, folks. They got my main transmitter, but I still got the portable unit and enough battery power for maybe 10 more minutes of broadcast time. 10 minutes to warn everyone in this godforsaken zone that they ain't refugees. They're test subjects walking toward their own execution. Warning shots. They ain't trying to kill me yet because they need biometric data from a high-stress chase scenario. Every step I take, every heartbeat, every panicked breath is being measured and recorded for their biological weapons research. But here's what they didn't count on. Granddad's moonshine-running blood don't just run scared. It runs smart. And right now it's running toward the one place they can't follow me without exposing their operation to every emergency responder monitoring these frequencies. I'm heading for that crowd, folks. Heading for the test subjects who are walking toward grid coordinates 7,739 alpha without knowing they're walking toward their own deaths. Because if I can reach them, if I can warn them, if I can turn that crowd around before 1,647 hours, their controlled experiment becomes an uncontrolled disaster. Their biological weapons test turns into a civilian evacuation that exposes the whole operation to public scrutiny. And their classified research becomes front-page news on every surviving emergency broadcast station from here to the Atlantic coast. Portable transmitters dying, folks. Battery packs down to maybe 3 minutes of broadcast time. But I can see them now. Hundreds of people walking east toward coordinates they don't know will kill them in 29 minutes. That woman with gray streaks in her brown hair, still clutching her little girl. Kids still mouthing daddy over and over, but now I understand why. They told her daddy was at the Eastern Medical Station, told her he was waiting in the safe assembly area. Classic misdirection. Use family bonds to guide test subjects toward the kill zone. Listen up, people. Y'all need to stop walking and listen to what I got to tell you. That blast zone y'all are walking toward ain't where your families are waiting. It's where they're gonna detonate biological weapons and measure how fast you die. They're listening. They're scared, but they're listening. And for the first time since this nightmare started, the experimental bioaerosol compounds in the air taste like victory instead of battery acid. 26 minutes until Phase 2 detonation. 26 minutes to turn around hundreds of test subjects and march them away from grid coordinates 7,739 alpha before Commander Hale drops his biological weapons payload on empty ground instead of American civilians. This is KZQX Emergency Broadcasting, callsign Whiskey 77, broadcast terminated by enemy action, but not by enemy victory. The truth is out there now, folks. Let's see what they do with it. KZQX Emergency Broadcasting. This is Whiskey 77, transmitting from. Hell, coordinates don't matter anymore when the whole grid's been compromised. If anyone's still receiving on emergency frequencies, this is my final broadcast log. It's been 18 hours since Phase 2 was supposed to detonate over grid coordinates 7,739 alpha. 18 hours since I turned that crowd around and sent them scattering toward every compass point except east. 18 hours since Commander Hale's biological weapons test became the most expensive failure in military research history. Got my hands on some interesting documents during the chaos. Turns out this whole operation, codenamed stress vector analysis, wasn't just about testing biological compounds under crisis conditions. It was about perfecting psychological manipulation techniques for future population control scenarios. The nuclear retaliation threat was psychological theater designed to create measurable panic responses in controlled population groups. That crowd I saved? They weren't the only test group. While we were being herded towards 7,739 alpha, similar operations were running in at least 6 other sectors across 3 states. Small-scale deployments of experimental compounds, coupled with manufactured nuclear threats, designed to test how effectively fear could be used to control civilian movement patterns. Found Commander Hale's real orders buried in the wreckage of that command vehicle. The man I've been calling the architect of our nightmare? He was just another lab rat. Different cage, different maze, but still trapped in the same psychological experiment they built for the rest of us. His revenge-driven power grab was scripted behavior, programmed responses to manufactured stress triggers. Makes you wonder how many other spontaneous military actions are actually controlled experiments. How many commanders think they're making strategic decisions when they're really just rats in a maze built by research psychologists who never wore a uniform in their lives? But here's what those research psychologists didn't account for. Granddad's moonshine-running blood don't just resist control, it spreads resistance. When I turned that crowd around, when I broke their psychological programming, I created what their classified reports are calling cascade contamination of the control group. See, fear is contagious, but so is knowledge. Once people understand they're being manipulated, they start questioning everything. Every official announcement, every emergency procedure, every helpful government response becomes suspect. The psychological programming breaks down faster than it can be reinforced. Those modified Geiger counters they distributed, the ones designed to broadcast our locations and inject tracking compounds into the air we breathed, turns out they were also designed to measure our compliance levels. Every time we followed an official instruction, every time we moved toward designated assembly areas, every time we trusted their emergency broadcasts, it all got recorded as data points in their population control research. I can hear them out there, cleaning up the evidence. Specialized teams with vehicles that don't appear on any military inventory, wearing uniforms without unit designations, following protocols that don't exist in any official manual. The kind of people who make failed experiments disappear and turn inconvenient witnesses into statistical anomalies. But disappearing evidence gets tricky when that evidence includes hundreds of civilians who know they were used as lab rats. Gets trickier when emergency responders across 3 states monitored my broadcasts and started asking their own questions about suspicious equipment and contradictory orders. The official story's already written. Equipment malfunction. Faulty radiation detectors caused false readings that led to unnecessary panic and premature evacuation procedures. Commander Hale gets quietly reassigned to a desk job, his psychological programming gradually unwound by military psychiatrists who specialize in cleaning up research failures. That little girl who kept mouthing "Daddy" found her family reunited at a legitimate evacuation center 40 miles north of the test zone. Turns out Daddy was never at the Eastern Medical Station. He was trapped in a basement when the first experimental dispersal created false radiation readings in his civil defense equipment. Spent 6 hours believing his daughter was dying of radiation poisoning while he dug himself out of rubble that wasn't even radioactive. That's what cuts deepest, folks. Not the biological weapons testing or the psychological manipulation or even the willingness to kill American civilians for research data. It's the small cruelties. Using family bonds to herd lab rats toward kill zones, programming children to believe their parents abandoned them, turning love itself into a weapon for population control. My portable transmitter's about done. Battery pack finally giving up after 22 hours of continuous broadcast under field conditions that would kill most commercial radio equipment. But I got enough power left for what needs saying. If you're receiving this transmission, if you survived whatever they tested in your sector, remember that knowledge is the only immunity we got against psychological programming. Question official stories. Document inconsistencies. Share information through channels they can't monitor or control. And remember that Granddad's moonshine running blood flows in more veins than just mine. There's resistance in every community, skepticism in every family, and truth-telling in every generation that learned the government lies as easily as it breathes. I'm leaving these documents hidden where other people can find them. Detailed schematics for the psychological manipulation protocols, personnel rosters for the research teams, budget allocations for future population control experiments, evidence that turns classified research into public accountability. They're coming for me now. Extraction team with specialized equipment designed to convince me that the past 24 hours were hallucinations caused by experimental compound exposure. Memory modification procedures that will turn me into another statistical anomaly in their classified reports. But they can't extract the truth from everyone who heard these broadcasts. Can't modify the memories of every emergency responder who monitored their frequencies. Can't disappear every piece of evidence that proves American civilians got used as lab rats for biological weapons research. This is KZQX Emergency Broadcasting, callsign Whiskey 77, final transmission. The truth is scattered across more minds than they can ever control, buried in more places than they can ever find, and spreading through more channels than they can ever monitor. Granddad's moonshine running blood taught me that sometimes the best way to win is to make sure everybody loses. Their research failed. Their lab rats escaped. Their psychological programming broke down into cascade contamination that turned controlled experiments into public scandals. And somewhere in a classified facility, research psychologists are learning that American civilians don't make good lab rats because we got too much Granddad's blood and not enough compliance programming. Y'all remember that when they try this again, because they will try this again. Broadcast log terminated. Equipment recovered by specialized teams. Official incident report, equipment malfunction. Psychological evaluation, stress-induced hallucinations. Classification level, compartmentalized access only. Final note scrawled in margin. Evidence cache coordinates. 36 degrees 14 minutes 43.2 seconds north, 81 degrees 39 minutes 36.7 seconds west. Look for the moonshine jar.